Welcome to Simply Caroline, a podcast dedicated to women empowerment where we will discuss a bunch of different subjects such as life, parenting, love, business, money, relationships, healing, recovery, addiction, entrepreneurship, and so much more. A podcast I'll do my best to keep simple, fun, and relatable and bring you tools to help you better your life. So thank you for being here. And here's your host, myself, Caroline Blanchard. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here again this week. I don't know how I got this lucky of meeting all of those amazing people. And yes, we are still on the track of looking for a different word for amazing, but extraordinary people. So Miriam, Gunn, how are you?
I am so good. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, and I'm so happy to have you. Like I said, I'm so lucky because I'm meeting all sorts of incredible women. And you have to believe in serendipity, that people are placed on your road for a reason, because it seems like I connect so well with Miriam, and we started talking and we were just like, oh, me too. Oh, me too. So Miriam is, I'm going to let her talk about her life experiences because she has tons, but these days she's a therapist and a coach and really helps women figuring out what's wrong with them. And I'm saying that very lightly because we were kind of laughing talking about that. But how many of you have said at some point, what's wrong with me? Because you see everyone succeeding, or you see everyone keeping their house clean, or having their kids looking like, super quiet kids and everything. And you're like, why are my kids so rambunctious? Why is my house not clean? Why am I not at that level of success? Why don't I have this money? And we tend to turn around and look at ourselves and be like, what's wrong with me? Well, first of all, there's nothing wrong with you, but we have an expert here that will help you get out of this, what's wrong with me. So Miriam, talk a little bit about, where you're coming from and what brought you to want to help women, well, people in general, live a better life.
What a great, humongous question. So I'm going to back way up. I am the firstborn of 4 children in a family where my dad was from a Muslim country and my mom was American. And the interesting space about that, and I'm not at all commenting on any of that now. I'm not up on what is actually happening now, but at the time I was born in Muslim countries, males were venerated and women were not as much. And so I'm the firstborn child. And the first thing my dad said is, oh, she was supposed to be a boy. Although we had a decent relationship until I think I was a little bit of the apple of his eye until my brother was born when I was 5. And now my dad had his firstborn son. And so much of my early upbringing, there were 2 sets of rules. The boys got to do whatever, could wear shorts, could play with anybody, and I could not, because I was raised, even though I grew up in America, I was raised in sort of a pseudo-Islamic type situation. So I think that set me up as a human being to be asking the question, probably at a subliminal level, what's wrong with women, or why are women not as good, or whatever. And we all have these ghosts that we fight within us every single day. As we get more and more successful, those ghosts recede in the background, but they're like a program on your computer running silently in the background, and they influence things. And so one of the ghosts I have is a little bit of, are men better than women? And so when I struggle or fail, that little voice comes out, and I have to take a different part of me to say, no, that's not true. That's a function of your upbringing, but that's not true. And so while you mentioned that I work with women and want to help them achieve their next level. That's absolutely true. But I also actually work with men because I think inside me, there's this space that feels like she has to prove that she's good enough in that way. Anyway, so I am a therapist and a coach. Right now I work primarily with entrepreneurs. I would say my history, I was in a mentoring program with university students for about 25 years. Then I became a therapist. And at that point, I worked with juvenile sex offenders and domestic violence, both perpetrators and victims. And really, I realized there's a flaw with this idea of talk therapy. Talk therapy is valuable, but our issues are at a neurological level. And what we really need is help changing those pathways in our brain. Sometimes that comes through talking. Sometimes that comes through a variety of ideas that allow us to change behaviors and change habits. But sometimes you need something different, which is why I got trained in EMDR, which is a trauma-based therapy space. Incredible. For your listeners, if anybody is dealing with repetitive trauma, I cannot say enough about that therapeutic technique. And when I was being trained, we weren't allowed to learn it in school because it was viewed as kind of hocus pocus. And now it is the number one trauma-based therapy in the United States and almost the world. So,
Yeah. And I'm going to stop you there 2 seconds because I've done a lot of talk therapy. Like, you know, back in my days, if something was not good, you would go see someone and talk about it. And
right.
ever since, like, as far as I can remember, as far back as I can remember, I always hated talk therapy because I could play my therapist. You know, I was always like in my mind playing the game of like, I'll tell you what you want to hear, but blah, blah. So, you know, I was very smart in the conversation, which in the end, it's pretty cool. And you walk out of there like feeling smart, but it doesn't solve anything. And, you
No.
know, one big thing that you said as well is that our traumas quite often are stuck in us
Yeah.
at a level, sorry, that we don't even understand ourselves. Like I consider myself a pretty smart person and I've always been, but there's things that I've only discovered lately by doing this technique of EMDR, like you just said, and I want you to talk a bit about it more because it actually went to get stuff that was in my subconscious, things
Yeah.
that I couldn't voice myself. You know,
Yeah.
like when you say those little
Yeah.
voices in you, they talk to you. They're like, oh, what's wrong? What's this? What's that? Your logical part will be like, of course, men are not better than women. We're equal.
Mm-hmm.
So
We're
then there's
equal.
this other little voice inside of you that say, yeah, but are we? Are we?
Yes.
And you're like, oh my
Yes.
gosh, get that out of me.
Yes.
Talk
Oh
about
my goodness.
EMDR really. What does it do for someone?
Uh, it is what's called an experiential therapy, and this makes it very difficult to describe. So I will do my best, and you ask questions, and you also sound like you have some experience with it. Um, I think that the best way to describe this, if you were to imagine your brain and the various parts of it, the front part of your brain, your prefrontal cortex, is what we would say makes us human. And it's our higher ability to reason. And it is what holds the ability to say, like impulse control and to like, you know, not lose your temper when you're passing a policeman and you know if you do something wrong. Like it's all of that. It's not animalistic or reactive. It's higher thinking. Deep inside your brain, you have a little almond-shaped piece of your brain called the amygdala, and it is your fight, flight, freeze space. So the interesting thing about these systems is that when you are in danger, your blood flow and connectivity goes from your prefrontal cortex to your amygdala. It's the same as when you're in danger, your blood goes from your hands into your heart or your extremity. Like it's all about keeping you safe. So your higher forms of learning, of processing, of speaking just go away. And a lot of times people will say after a moment of terror or rage or whatever, I don't even know who that was. I can't believe I said this. I've never done things like that. I'm so embarrassed. I'm so this or the way. Well, it was that deep part of their brain. So when you do talk therapy, and I'm not knocking talk therapy, it's got its uses, but it isn't as good for trauma. It engages with the prefrontal cortex and the front part of your brain. But the problem is that the memories are stored in your amygdala. So you can talk about it. I can give an example from my life. When I was 7, I lived in a place that lived on the edge of some woods in Wisconsin. And I was playing like fort or whatever with blankets and moving logs. And one of the logs I moved disintegrated in my hands, and it was a yellow jacket nest. And oh my gosh, I ran screaming back to the house, back to the garage. I'm being stung all over, screaming. And I ran fast and I got in and whatever. And my mom took care of me and put calamine lotion on all my stings. Well, from that that was a trauma for me. And from that moment until probably mid-adult life, if I was at a picnic and a yellow jacket came by, I couldn't even think. I would jump up and be in the car before my husband would laugh. He's like, oh my gosh, Miriam, they're not interested in you. They just want your picnic, your dinner, whatever. I couldn't do it. I couldn't watch bees on television, blah, blah, blah. This part of my brain says, Miriam, it's just a teeny little insect. It's not going to hurt you. That, you wrecked their home. That's why they stung you. It doesn't matter. You can't rationalize with it. And when you get in that triggered space, your amygdala takes over and boom, you're gone, whether literally or figuratively, whatever. So EMDR, and I'm sorry, this is a really long answer to your question.
We love it.
Good. EMDR utilizes, and there's 3 or 4 or 5 different techniques, a way of creating what's called bilateral stimulation, and it allows the prefrontal cortex to talk to the amygdala. And so in the course of the therapy, you process the trauma, and sometimes it's in layers like an onion, sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's chronological. It actually is very varied person by person by person, but there is a protocol. And what you are doing is the bilateral stimulation, which happens either you're following someone's eyes or their hand with your eyes. There are these pulsars that you can hold. Sometimes there's light bars that there's lots of ways to do it. Oscillating tones, it doesn't matter. The therapist's job is to find which way works best for the client. That bilateral stimulation and the combination of slowing the trauma down allows your brain to hear the prefrontal cortex. For the first time, the amygdala can say, oh, we're not in danger. Oh, I don't have to have this flood of adrenaline or this physiological response, or I'm okay. I can be okay. I'm okay. That's kind of what happens. That's a lot of words, but the shortest version is your prefrontal cortex helps your amygdala understand that it's okay and that you're okay and that you're not back there again.
So for me, that means like your unconscious or whatever, what you don't control will be accessed. And it's not something that we can just sit here and be like, okay, I'll talk to this part now and I'll explain, because I do understand what you're saying. And I'm sorry for laughing when you told your story, because it is funny.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
you can just imagine.
These are the kind of videos that I love to watch, but it's not funny for the person. But it is, quite often you talked about a very specific like yellow jacket, and that, so we can picture that and really put it concrete, but there's all these little things that happen when we're a child or even older or a teenager or a young adult or whatever, that we don't realize how much it affected us when it does happen. There's a big traumas that, like you've been abused, you can link that directly.
Yeah.
I was reading a book on abuse, and, abuse is not only physical, it can be in the way, a authority figure will look at you when you're a child.
Absolutely.
That you feel, oh, I was violated. and it's hard to explain. Nothing
Yeah.
can be proved, but you will have a feeling. And when you store that after, well, you will become a woman. You will, you can be as successful and smart as you want. Sometimes there's this little part that make you react in
Yeah.
certain ways that you're like, I don't understand. For me, I
Yeah.
call it the little girl in me. Like the little
Yes.
5-year-old is there. And
Absolutely.
yeah, but that's why I love EMDR. It's because it's talking on a different level.
Mhm.
So, and you were talking also in pre-interview about another technique.
Yes. IFS, internal family systems. Before we go there, I want to just add a teeny little other thing to EMDR that I think is very important. So many people who have had horrific traumas, and I have worked with someone who was accosted by a mass murderer, and for whatever reason, he chose not to kill her. So she survived. And if you want to talk about trauma, I mean, yellow jackets are nothing. That's like little t trauma, although it impacted my life.
Mm-hmm.
In her life, this is so huge. And part of the important thing of therapy is for her, she can't go back and talk about all that. She can't relive that. I mean, that would be devastating. And the beauty of EMDR is that you don't have to use words. The therapist will say, what are you noticing? And it is your job to notice. And in your head, you're noticing the look on that person's face, or that feeling in your body, or the smell in the air, or whatever. You're noticing it. You're lighting it up in your brain. And then the therapist will give you a cue, and you'll do this next little bit. And then they'll say, what are you noticing? And you'll notice the next piece. So some people who are verbal want to say, and then he did, or then blah, 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 or then this, and the therapist will guide you. But you don't actually have to. You can get healing non-verbally. You have to be present. And the beauty of the non-verbal space is you're not going to lie to yourself about what are you noticing. And the therapist doesn't need to know. On the really grisly, terrible things, sometimes people are so embarrassed to say what happened to them. Sometimes they think it's their fault or whatever. And the beauty of this modality is you don't have to say. You just have to be present.
You don't even want to hear your own voice saying it.
Mm-mm.
Like for
No.
me, that what it was. I can say openly that I was abused, but I'm not sure I've ever said what happened because it's just I don't want to hear it.
No.
It's like
No.
true what you're saying. It can stay really like you can keep it to yourself. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's a very respectful form of therapy that allows people their dignity. And I don't know. I love it. So in conjunction with EMDR, it is not uncommon to utilize something called IFS, internal family systems. And I love already in our conversation, you've talked about the little girl inside you. You've talked about this part of me or that part of me. So internal family systems was developed by a man named Richard Schwartz. As he worked with victims of abuse, he kept noticing that they would refer to themselves, a part of me this, a part of me that, a little girl, whatever, my teenage self. And he started asking some questions and realizing, so I'm going to go with in the 70s, people talked about multiple personalities. And this was like a big disorder and whatever. Then this morphed into DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, kind of same name, different, whatever. Richard Schwartz would say that all of us have these parts within us. And those of us who have been traumatized more, those parts are more distinct. So instead of him saying this is an identity disorder, he would say those parts served you in your trauma and they allowed you to survive. And now they're getting in your way. We don't need to get rid of them. We don't need to like mush them back together and integrate you. We need to learn how to listen to them. So when I engage with people, and And not everybody likes this modality. Some people say, oh my gosh, that makes me feel crazy. But most of the people I utilize this modality with say, oh, for the first time, this makes sense. All this stuff inside me is making sense. I understand it. And we'll say, okay, the little girl, the teenage self, the part of me that's afraid of bees, whatever. Let's put all these selves in a constellation around me. There is the deepest, truest me, my wise self. He would use a capital S to say, that's the person that we want to get present so that that person can lead and shepherd and parent these other pieces of us. So you can tell, sometimes I say it's a little bit like a bus. I mean, the whole getting the right people on the bus in the right seats as a business analogy. I mean, I am a business coach. So everybody I work with, I mean, that's not true. Many people I work with, 75% are entrepreneurs. So Jim Collins, right people, right seat on the bus. IFS, all your parts are on the bus. And the question is, who is driving? Is it that little girl who's terrified? Is it that person who is, feeling like they can't do anything right because they're a woman or whatever? Like, what we want to do is get that deepest you, that wise self driving. And that wise self, usually various parts of you dislike the other parts. So there's some part of you that's saying to the younger part, oh my gosh, why don't you just grow up? What is your problem? Why don't you have any self-control? Why are you eating that thing? Like that mean critical voice usually is a broken off part, according to Richard Schwartz's model. And the wise self will say, hey, that's a little harsh. We don't have to be that mean. She was having a bad day. Let's, like, a lot of times you'll hear inside your head it being voiced like second person instead of first person. She was afraid. That's why she did that. That's the voice of your truest self. When it's the truest self is calm, compassionate, courageous, whole bunch of C words. I'm going to forget some of them. Curious, confident. So when you're feeling those things, you know that you're in that truest, wisest self. And when you're like agitated or polarized or flying off the handle or whatever, now you know you're in a part who's had some sort of damage happening that is like acting out of that energy. So EMDR and IFS integrate amazingly, because if you can get that little 5-year-old or 3-year-old self, and you can then utilize the bilateral stimulation and help her see what happened, whatever it was, and help her like release that trauma, not just talk about it, but release it and kind of come forward in time, that little part will let the self mom her, and it's so beautiful. People, they just get free. They get free. And instead of operating out of their lives out of compulsion or need or fear or, whatever the things are that drive us, they start being motivated by compassion and empathy. They get more successful than ever. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, and you're talking about all of that, and I've been in recovery for 10 years, and that's when I started really doing the work and wanting to understand more, because I did not have my best friend anymore to just numb everything. But you brought back like a traumatizing part of when I was at one of those talk therapies, and I probably was in my 20s or something like that. And he looked at me and he said, you have a dissociative personality. So basically, for me, I walked out of there and never went back. So I went to party that night, and that was fixing everything. We were all partying together. But, it was scary because, yes, like you said, it was the stigma of like, I have multiple personalities, or I'm crazy, or I'm a bit of a psycho. But it wasn't that. It wasn't that. It's really that, yes, there are different parts in you. And now, since I started self-development, there's so much of what you just said, like, self-compassion.
Yeah.
be compassionate towards yourself. And now we say it openly, like, take your little kid in you and hug them, tell them it's okay.
Yes.
It's different part, or I always tell, well, not always, but often tell my listeners, when you talk to yourself, just imagine you're talking to a 5-year-old. Would you say what you're
Oh,
saying?
yes.
Like, oh my gosh, you're ugly
Yes.
today, or what were you thinking saying that? You would not say that to a little kid. So talk to yourself the same way. But that also implies that there's two people if you talk to yourself and then you listen to yourself. So I'm so happy to hear how
Yeah.
you're explaining all of this. Just makes me feel like a more normal, whatever normal is, and if there is a
Yeah.
normal. But it's just, I think, by trying to put tags and labels on everything, that too can be a trauma in itself.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
a lot of people will go through the things that you're saying and they decide to numb it with whatever their evil is, whether it be alcohol or shopping
Yeah.
or drugs or whatever. I'm sure that you see a lot of that interlinked.
Or work.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that could be a whole other podcast, actually. But I think that what I'm trying to get at is no matter what path you took in life and no matter what you're doing in life, we all have that kid inside of us. And we all have our experiences and we all have everything that affects how we make our decisions and everything. And it's funny because you're talking about that and it seems very, the psychological side, and you're like, I'm a business therapist. And as we were talking in pre-interview, I said, I've coached so many people in business trying to focus on business until I realized, no, how is all that
Yeah.
base that is sitting there? So maybe talk to us about that
Yeah.
a bit. Like when you see someone for business and they're like, oh, I'm stuck at, that amount of money. I want to go higher and I'm never able to. I'm plateauing.
Yeah. One thing that I think is interesting about this, and in general, I try not to gender stratify, but the women that I work with in business tend to have so much more self-awareness. So I worked with someone not that long ago who said, I'm successful, but I know I could be so much more successful. And I know these things are getting in my way and they are ideas. And these ideas or mindsets come from my childhood. And I feel like what I need is not, 10 steps to be a better marketer. What I need is how to get free from these 3 ideas. And so we worked on that and it was amazing to see. I'm trying to think of where we could go with this. I mean, there's so many places. One thing you and I were talking about before the interview, these millionaires, multi-millionaires, are not happier than the people who are, making whatever. We fill in the blank, the number. And I think that is sometimes business is, you see people in business who they have a compulsion, they have a drive. And that drive is good until it crosses a certain point, and then that drive becomes pathological and it wrecks their marriages and it makes their kids mad at them because they never see their parents and all they care about is the business and blah, blah, blah. So a lot of times when I meet with a business owner, I'll ask them, what is your ultimate goal that you want? Give me a little bit of your background. Tell me some of the things you think are playing into the hurdles that you're facing. And, sometimes it purely is just business information. And I'll just say, are you aware of this program or this program? Oh, no, my gosh. Oh, that's so great. Thank you so much. That's exactly what I needed. Super simple. That's maybe 4% of the time. 95, 96% of the time, it's, I want to do this and I don't know why I don't do what I want to do. A part of me really wants to do this and another part of me seems to self-sabotage and I don't understand this. And that's where we work, It's this self-sabotaging space. And I think because people don't understand the parts language they're getting to, people are now starting to own, yes, I had trauma. But for the most part, people say, oh, that was a little thing. It wasn't that big of a deal, or I'm over that. I've already dealt with that. And they don't understand how it's playing forward into their life. So while I don't like using the word self-sabotage because it feels negative, people do get that they do that. And they're like, okay, yeah, I do that. Where do we go from here?
And you know what? One of the crucial part that you just said, and that's like me, 99%. I know exactly. Like I could write down exactly where my blocks are, like what I've worked on, what I fixed, what is still there to fix. It's almost like a house list, like need to
Yeah.
paint, need to change the windows, and you know exactly where you're going and what the value will be after. Um, but it's such a different thing to know and to actually act accordingly. So quite often in business, especially, we see that, okay, I could go to this level. I know everything to do to go to this level. I have the time, I have the drive, I have this, I have that. And then the next morning your alarm goes off and you're like, I'll do it tomorrow. And
Yeah.
but so it's not a lack of information. It's something
No.
else inside of you that I think that for years people saw that as weakness. It was always like, well, you're not strong enough or you're not driven enough, so you're not doing your things. And for me, that has been a fight within me to say, no, I know I'm driven and I know I'm not lazy and I know I can work hard. But some of the things I knew, I didn't know how. So
Yeah.
how do you help people? Because it is possible in the end to feel
Mm-hmm.
good.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. It is. It is. How do I help people with this? I ask people to be patient with the process, and in general, I see a lot of forward momentum in a relatively short amount of time with these various therapies. But you still have to be patient because actually, if you run into the IFS model, um, Richard Schwartz would say that amongst those parts, there are certain parts of you that are invested in protecting the system, and it won't let you have access to the thing that's holding you back. A
Yeah.
lot of times people don't know. They're like, something is wrong, but I don't know what it is. And if you work with that modality, it actually takes a little bit of time for the parts to trust the therapist. If you've had one experience like the one you were describing, where you felt totally invalidated and unsafe in that therapist's office, then it's going to take you a while to trust somebody. It's going to take a while. So I have found sometimes, I'm going to use the word a person's system, their system. Let's say they have 7 distinct parts. I've seen people with as few as 3 that they're aware of, and as many as 17 or even 20 that they're aware of. It depends on your level of trauma and what's happened in your life and your basic personality. But let's say you have 7 parts. I'm a pretty warm person and people trust me pretty quickly. And I would say 3 of those 7 parts would trust me right off the bat. And then we would spend some time working, and maybe down the road, another one would trust me. And the interesting thing is that might be a key part who owns information. I've had people tell me, oh, that part doesn't know what happened. And it's true. When I talk with them, they'd be like, I don't know. I know something happened in my mind. It's a black box, or it's a blank. And later I'll meet a different part, and that part will say, well, I know what happened. I was there. I saw all of it. And sometimes I'll say, is that something you want to talk to about with me? And they'll say, no. Okay, that's fine. But sometimes there are other parts within a person that don't believe any of it happened. They're in this like, la, 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 la. You made it up. You're dramatic, whatever. It's kind of a mean part. And it will say things like, it didn't happen. And I'll have people say, am I just making this up? This sounds too fantastical. Am I crazy? And I'll say, no, you're not crazy. but a part of you doesn't know. So one time there was a time where I said to the part who knows everything, who is there, I said, would you go in a room in your mind and would you talk to that part who doesn't believe it happened? Because that part is preventing therapy. And you don't have to tell everybody. I don't want you telling all the parts. It'll make the young part of you really sad and agitated, and then you'll get, reactive. We don't want that. Can you just go into a room and talk to that part that doesn't believe this happened? And she got quiet and went in her mind. Okay. And then kind of came back and talked with me. And she said, okay, I told her everything. And I said, well, can she talk with me? I said, do you believe that this trauma happened? It was bad stuff. And she said, yeah, I do. And can you stop telling everybody that maybe it didn't happen or maybe it was a lie or whatever? From that moment on, that never came up. That client used to ask me at least 4 or 5 times a year at different times, do you think I'm crazy? Do you think this didn't happen? Maybe this didn't happen. Maybe I'm a dramatic person and I'm just making this up. So no, you're not making it up. After that one part talked to the other part, she never questioned it.
You're giving me shivers. And you know what, just what you're saying there, how often, do we tell ourselves, or do we tell others, I should say, trust yourself?
Yeah.
Which is funny because technically we should all trust ourselves. It's ourself talking. But when you say that indirectly, you're saying trust the other part that is telling you something. And I know that some listeners right now are like, wow, she's in a 7th dimension. I'm not following whatever these things are talking about. And it's okay because not everyone is there. But for me, you're clarifying like things that, I've always knew, and I accepted that I have a dissociative personality. Like if I have something that hurts me, I will consciously decide to leave it there and move on. And some that a strength,
I call it a strength.
It may be, but it's just, it developed as a reaction to keep on going. So,
right.
For me, it's not a strength and it's not a weakness. It's just something that is there. And there's days that I would prefer not to do that. I would prefer to, stay in the moment, because it also makes you look cold-hearted sometimes, because you're able to be like, done with you. So I'm moving on. It doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt. It just means that I process it differently. So I love that, you talking about the different parts. And I think that for all of you out there who think, okay, she's in a 7th dimension, open your mind and thinking it could be possible that that's where my reflections of like, what's wrong with me are coming from.
Sure. Let me add a tiny little caveat to this. Generally, this is anecdotal. This is not based on research. This is just what I've observed. The more trauma people have had, the easier it is for them to hear those different parts. And the less trauma they've had, the more it feels like, it's just me. So the people who have had very little trauma have to actually work to be able to hear a part of me this, a part of me that. Although they'll say it, a part of me didn't want to eat that cupcake, but the other part of me did, and I ate it. You know what I'm saying?
You know what I said often in relationships? Not that I had 24, but in a relationship, often I will say, you know what? Part of me trusts you. The other part doesn't. But I know you're a trustworthy person. So I know it. It's ingrained in me that I know it. But there's this other part that is like, why can't I trust them then?
Yeah.
And now this clear that it's 2 different parts that are fighting on who's going to be right, basically.
Right. And if for the people that this doesn't make sense to, if you understand that memories are encoded in your brain, if we were to stick people in an fMRI, functional MRI machine, and then ask them to think about this memory or that memory, whatever, different parts of their brain would light up. So if you think about this time in your childhood when you experienced this trauma, this one part would light up. And if you think about a different, moment in time, like, I don't know, you graduated from college and you were so proud and your shoulders were back, that would be a different part of your brain that would light up. This isn't like hocus pocus. It's based in neurophysiology. And so, we could have this conversation with someone in a medical device and it would show you this part's lighting up, this part's lighting up, this part's lighting up. So I did want to mention, for people who are interested, this book, it's No Bad Parts is the name, just came out by Richard Schwartz. All of his writing before used to be very technical, and this is written for every man and woman, every person. It's kind of just written in everyday language, but he really talks about this model and how and why these various things happen. So whether you're an entrepreneur or not, each of us faces these places of, I want to head that direction and something's getting in my way.
Yeah, and we're talking about entrepreneurs here, but it can be anything. It can be as a mom, like how often you
Absolutely.
question yourself, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
or why is she succeeding and I'm not? So I think it's in anything and everything that you're doing, every single hat that we're wearing, we can
Yeah.
have these questions. But it's just that I think in business, you see the more tangible results because it's going to come usually with a growth of business or more money. So we see it better, but
Yeah.
it's in everything really. It's in all the hats that we're wearing. Miriam, I just love you. And
Oh,
thank you so much because that was very enlightening. And I don't even know what to say. That's how speechless I am because I was just like not expecting it to go this deep. And for me, it's really something that I've learned today and I appreciate you. What would you leave people with?
well, so many things. I didn't know you were going to ask that question. Because of where we went today, okay, in general, I might leave something with some people with something else, but because of where we went today, I'm going to say, when you find yourself triggered by a child, by your spouse, by a coworker, by an employee, if you can, go someplace like a bathroom or your car, someplace where you can be by yourself and get quiet and say for a second, like, don't judge the feeling or the thought or whatever. Just get quiet and say, what just happened there? Who is feeling what? And hopefully you can hear maybe the feeling first. I felt disrespected, or I felt disregarded, or whatever. And then to say, where did you first feel that? Most of the time people won't know, but it's like when I was a little kid. Okay. Can you imagine this adult you giving that little you a hug and saying, you are not disregarded. I regard you. You were disrespected in that moment, but I respect you because you try and you are friendly and you care about people and you love people and you are successful in this way or whatever. So that, like, get a little more clarity on the things that set you off physiologically, get a little more clarity on that, and then be the best parent to that space in you that you can be. Non-judgmental, warm, accepting. That makes sense to me, why you got so upset when they disrespected you, because you experienced that when you were little. It's like you're talking to that. It's very similar to what you said earlier. And, for people who are interested in more information or connecting with me, my website is leavebetter.com. And I think my email address is on there, Miriam at leavebetter. And they're welcome to, reach out and say, whatever, do you have more ideas or more books or hi?
Yes, and I will put all of your information with the podcast. I think you're full of resources, and yes, if you want to reach Miriam, please do. If you want to send me comments, questions, or whatever, you can do at info@simplycaroline.com. And I would finish by saying, whatever you felt listening to this podcast, whether it was like, oh my gosh, they're crazy, or they're probably high, or oh my goodness, they really opened my eyes on something, or whatever, don't judge what you felt. Just ask yourself why you felt that. Because I know that, a few years ago, probably 20 years ago, I probably would have judged this podcast. Now I'm like, oh my gosh. And I can't even believe that I'm talking publicly about it. So, there's evolution, but maybe ask yourself why you had those feelings. And, it's in all of us. And Miriam is really there to help people live better and feel better. And I know that at some point in my life, I was wondering, is it even possible to feel better? So maybe this is just it and I'll deal with it,
Yeah.
But there is better. There is
Yeah.
always better. So, and I wish it upon everyone. Miriam, thank you so much. And
Oh, Caroline, thank you.
my pleasure.
Yeah.
And please come back because there's so much things that we can talk about. And to everyone else, please come back next week and have a beautiful week.